Where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, which is a part of the United States that doesn't have a lot of brown people, especially not in the 1980s when I first moved there. And my experience was very much that of a typical rural kid, growing up on farmland and in communities that were more like villages than cities. My father actually died when I was very young in a violent crime. He was murdered, and it was in the middle of a time when he and my mom were getting a divorce. So there was all this contention between the two families. So it's been difficult ever since then, because being raised by a stepfather in a family where you have a different last name, you have brown skin and a family has white skin, in a rural community, it just got to be very difficult.
Growing up in that environment, what did it teach you about life?
From a very young age, I knew that you had to do what other people wanted you to do in order to be liked, in order to win reward. So all through elementary school and high school and all through sports and all through college even, my decisions were driven by what other people wanted me to do, specifically what my parents wanted me to do, and then of course what the other adults that my parents respected wanted me to do. I was not happy at home. I was not a happy kid for the most part. And it's partially, I think, the way I'm wired. I see hypocrisy and I see confusion and I see shifting goalposts and changing goals that you can't control. And I see injustice in all of that. So I very much wanted to leave home as quickly as possible by whatever route was the easiest to me. Ultimately, what ended up happening is I got a scholarship to a military college. And that military college was on the opposite side of the country from where I grew up, and it was exactly what I wanted. I joined the military in large part because it was what I was comfortable with. Doing what I was told is the thing that had gotten me to the success that I had achieved in high school, so why not keep doing what I was told? And when I went into the Air Force, I found that I really was ill-suited to that level of scrutiny. The constant supervision and the constant direction and the constant orders, it really rubbed me the wrong way. But I didn't have any other option. It was either succeed in the military or go back to Pennsylvania as a failure. And for me, the fear of failure was always greater than the pain of current struggle.
So what role did you take in the Air Force?
I took whatever role the Air Force gave me. At first, I was a student, and as you go through those ranks and grades, you learn different skills. I learned how to fly, I learned a foreign language, I learned enough information about astrodynamics and thermodynamics to become qualified for a secret clearance. I was later assigned to nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles specifically, and then I got my top secret clearance. I got my Cat 6 and Cat 12 nuclear clearance. I was a missileer, somebody who wore a key around their neck and went down into an underground bunker and sat 72-hour shifts. But by the time I left, I had followed the rules and made everybody happy to the point where I was actually a commander over multiple missile squadrons. So I started by commanding 10 nuclear missiles, and I left the Air Force commanding more than 200. When anybody leaves the military, they have a moment where they ask themselves, do I just want something that is the total opposite of everything I've just done? And I was one of those people. It's like having a breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend. Once you have that breakup, you want something completely the opposite. And that's what it was like for me. So I left the Air Force and I'm like, well, where can I do the exact opposite of holding the keys of destruction in my hand? And my thought was join the Peace Corps. So as I'm in my final days in the Air Force, I jump online to apply to the United States Peace Corps. And as I go through the Peace Corps online application, there's an actual red screen that pops up, a blue screen technically, that pops up with a red box. And that red box says, you may qualify for other opportunities in the US federal government. If you're willing to put your application on hold for 72 hours, a recruiter would reach out to you. And I'm 27 years old and I'm single and I'm already celebrating the fact that I'm leaving the military. So when I get an invitation that basically says there might be better opportunities for me, I'm the person that says yes. So I put that application on pause, and 24 hours later, I got a phone call from an unlisted number in Langley, Virginia.
What was the recruitment process and how did it feel to learn you'd passed?
It would be great to say that the recruitment process is brief, but it's not. It's a 9 to 16 month process to be recruited into CIA, and that's from the first interview, not from the first phone call. So you go through multiple rounds of interviews. The first interview is really focused on whether or not you are a good fit for the position they think you psychologically fit. Your second is an interview for intelligence. They want to see whether or not you actually know world affairs and can you write, can you speak, can you work as part of a team, can you solve a problem in a short period of time. And if you pass those two phases, then you go on to the really robust psych evaluation, the polygraph, the interview with a staff psychologist to start looking to see whether or not you really are who you appear to be based off of the previous interviews. By this point, you know you're applying to be a CIA officer, but you don't know what a CIA officer does. So in your mind, you're thinking that you're competing for the chance to be James Bond. You think you're competing for Lamborghinis and cocktail dresses and Monaco. So you're doing your absolute best to try to make everybody happy. And making them happy means being honest. So you're telling them about your drug use. You're telling them about your sexual fantasies. You're telling them about the time that you didn't do your math homework and cheated off your friend. You're telling them everything because you don't want them to say no to you.
Wait, so you're actively telling them the truth?
Absolutely. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who is willing to be absolutely transparent with the agency, with the organization, even over their own embarrassment, because that's the person who can be trusted in the field to execute an operation where they have to have sex with a prostitute and steal a secret from a general. That person has to come back and be honest again in order to collect the intelligence and make sure that all the legal ramifications of the operation are suited. So while it feels invasive, it's actually a test for professionalism. When I was first recruited by CIA, they asked me to be what's known as a case officer. And a case officer or an operations officer or what's known as an OO or a CO, these are called core collector positions, which means these are roles that go out and meet with people in the field actively stealing secrets. It's what you see when you watch James Bond, minus all the shooting and the high-speed boat chases, right? He's out there stealing thumb drives. He's out there making contacts. He's out there at casinos and brothels shaking hands with bad guys. That is what a core collector does.
How does one train to become a CIA case officer?
When you go to training at the farm, it's not the first training that you have. You have almost a full year's worth of training on the job beforehand. Training to be a case officer involves essentially three different skill sets. There's a cognitive skill set where you have to improve the way that you think. So understanding your own biases, your own limitations, understanding how you process information, whether you have a long-term or short-term memory, boosting the opposite type of memory. Then there's a technical skill that is based around the intelligence itself. And those technical skills around the intelligence are literally how you write a report, how you send it in secret, what the different avenues are for transmitting what's known as clandestine messages. So there's this technical element around the intelligence. And then there's the technical elements around operating itself. How you create an alias, how you live and operate an alias, how you travel across a border fraudulently, how you steal secrets, how you elicit information, how you drive a car at high speed, how you self-evacuate, how you hold your breath for longer than 2 minutes. All those technical operating skills are kind of the third pillar. So all the fun, sexy stuff really happens at the end. And all of the nitty-gritty intel stuff happens at the beginning.
Why do you think you were what they were looking for at the CIA?
I mean, in all honesty, I think that I was on the cusp of what they were looking for. I think that I was a convenient fit in all the right ways at a very difficult time, because this is 2007. CIA has just been given a direct mandate by the Senate to boost their recruitment of diverse people with foreign language. I was a diverse person with a very unique language. I spoke Chinese at the time. In many ways, I think the bureaucracy kind of forced them to look at me, even though my fit was probably borderline not the right fit. I was driven and ambitious, but I was also kind of stubborn and I questioned authority. For me, when I deployed to the farm, I wanted to do it my own way. And that made the farm very difficult for me. It ostracized me from some of my peers. It put me at odds with many of the instructors. I was really pushing hard, trying to prove myself based on skills, because I still believed at the time that skills were the most important thing. Believe it or not, anybody can hold their breath for longer than 2 minutes. Believe it or not, anybody can drive a car at high speed and get out of a J-turn. So it's not technical skills at that point. It's really subjective desire. Who do they want to work with and who do they not want to work with? On the last day of that training, I was actually deemed unfit for that role. I was failed. My empirical scores were good enough, but the subjective votes of the panel that makes the final decision, I missed by 1. So a majority rule essentially meant that I was not going to be allowed to be a core collector.
How did that feel?
It felt horrible. It felt unjust. It took me all the way back to my childhood where I remember seeing injustice all around me. And I didn't really know what to do. I mean, honestly, the first thing that went through my head is fuck this and let's just be gone.
Were you doing this all alone or did you have support?
When I started the farm, I was dating my wife, the woman who would become my wife. She was also a CIA officer, but she was not part of the same training pipeline as I was. She was a completely different skill set, something known as a targeter. I ask her what she thinks I should do, and her answer to me is mind-blowing, and she tells me, just do whatever makes you happy. And the idea of doing whatever makes me happy was such a foreign idea that I had never thought of it before. So when I had the time to reflect on it, I realized what that meant was staying in CIA, because staying in CIA meant I got to stay with this incredible woman. At this point in CIA, I was fully trained as a case officer, but never certified. And you can't technically have a job unless you fill a certified role. So they reclassified me into something called a staff operations officer. So a staff operations officer complements an operations officer by essentially doing all the administrative work that they can't do in the field. So I became, for all intents and purposes, a mission planner or a secretary or an admin, handling the money, handling the documents, handling the aliases, handling the travel plans, handling the operational security details that came with, sneaking money across borders and creating false identities on aircraft manifests. So I ended up doing a lot of counterterrorism, counter-proliferation, counter-human trafficking, organized crime. I started doing those kinds of missions and operations, which are not sexy and not well funded. While my career was being built in the armpits of the world, my wife's career was exactly the opposite. She was chasing the most sophisticated targets. She was at the top of her game. So we became this married CIA operationally undercover couple at a time when our careers were completely the opposite of each other. What we didn't expect is that at a time in our career that I'm not at liberty to share, CIA approached both of us simultaneously and asked us to start a new operation together overseas that was in pursuit of a critical American hostile threat, a nation state that was on the rise and threatening the economic and security of the United States. And they asked us to do this together, and they asked us to step out of our current roles to do it. That mission that became the critical element that shaped not just my career and my wife's career, but also went on to shape how the CIA was structured from that point forward. And that mission was in every way an exception to the norm that CIA had ever used before. As I'm sure anyone can imagine, CIA doesn't change unless it has to. And in the middle of the Obama administration, it became apparent to CIA that they had a mole inside the organization. He was a CIA officer, but he was working for a geopolitical rival that was also trying to become a superpower. And that geopolitical rival was at all efforts trying to steal American technology, trying to steal American financial institution information, trying to steal IP, trying to mimic military and industrial tools. That made a significant dent, not just in CIA's operations, but also in CIA's mission to ensure American primacy. So the CIA approached my wife and I because they needed people from outside of the mole's sphere of influence in order to create a whole new type of operation, insulated from the damage the mole could cause. Standard operating procedure for a CIA operation at the time was that you would send 1, maybe 2 officers out to a foreign country where they would not overlap, and then they would carry out independent operations and then come back to their home base and report their information. When we had to build a new style of operation, my wife and her experience in her role as a targeter identified that the most difficult target for us to track was a terrorist target. And then she leaned on me and my experience chasing terrorists in the field to confirm her suspicion, but also to kind of create operational practices that mimicked terrorist networks. the way they move money, the way they communicate, the way they decentralize information and command and control. And that foundation in terrorism became the model for our new operational process. So as we built our shadow cell, the reason we called it a cell was because it was based off of a terrorist cell. We created minimal access to the people who were inside. We created a firewall essentially between the leadership at CIA and the leadership of the cell in the field, so that there was only one pass-through, one connection between the two groups. And then we made me the pass-through for those two groups, because if my cover gets blown or if I'm the one that gets captured, that would give CIA and the operators in the cell a heads up that something was wrong. It would help them find the mole at CIA, but it would help us keep our operators safe in the field, because the mole would never be able to find the operators. The mole would only be able to find me. According to CIA headquarters, my job was to orchestrate, develop, and essentially deploy the cell. It was an administrative job. But the senior operator inside the cell thought differently because of my experience at the farm. So when he found out that I was both administratively certified and operationally capable, he made a field call to actually start using me in the field to deploy into hostile territory. And that made our cell really much more capable and effective than previous CIA operations. I could essentially go in advance of any case officer, and I could handle all of the administrative footwork in the country itself. And if people want to know what administrative footwork looks like at CIA, it means you're the one who buys the expensive whiskey on a fake credit card. You're the one who smuggles in bundles of cash and hides it under a bridge. You're the one who travels from country to country to get throwaway cell phones and then puts those throwaway cell phones in secret places throughout a target location. So now when the case officers land in country, they don't have to create any footprint for themselves. They can essentially be a complete ghost because I have pre-stationed all of their operational resources.
And you've done this under an alias in a cover story?
Absolutely. I myself am working under alias. I myself am working under a backstopped cover identity, which means that even as federal authorities from the target country look me up, they can find my credit card, they can find my residence, they can find my work history. It's all fake because it's all been created by CIA, but it's real to them. So then there's no reason for them to dig any further.
What were you posing as?
The details of my alias are classified still. What I've been allowed to express is that I was in a commercial capacity. I used a name similar to my name. My true name is Andrew. My alias names almost always would start with the letter A. It just makes it easier for me to be able to remember them on the move. I look Latino. My surname should be Latino. It wouldn't make very much sense to give me a surname that was Russian. So that's how our aliases are built, and that's how we operate. And then for me, I was able to operate in a commercial context because we knew that our target country was vulnerable to commercial ploys. It wanted to become a competitor to the United States. So instead of coming in under some kind of diplomatic identity, I would come in under a commercial identity.
And it gives you an opportunity to blend in and you don't get noticed, right?
Exactly. And when you talk about blending in or when you talk about being a gray man, people don't realize that that doesn't mean that you're neutral. It doesn't mean that you are dead weight. It means that you are just slightly contributory. You're just slightly liked. You're just slightly welcomed. That's how you truly become gray, because in the moment, nobody feels threatened by you. And 5 minutes after you leave, nobody remembers you were there. So the magic to being CIA, the magic to really actually living and working undercover, is to be just slightly liked, but not liked enough to be remembered.
How much danger would you have been in if you got caught?
Even though I was traveling in a role that was administrative, I was executing acts of espionage. I was crossing borders in a fraudulent identity with fake documentation. That is an offense around the world. Even just dropping a cell phone or leaving $1,000 under a bridge is grounds to be incarcerated in that country, tried under their legal system, and executed. While it was very high stakes, it was also something that we had learned specifically to master at the farm.
Was there ever a moment where you did feel your life was in danger on one of these operations?
At the peak of our shadow cell operation, I fell under scrutiny by a sophisticated surveillance unit. Generally speaking, when you travel to a hostile country, if you're a person of interest, you'll come across something that I call bumbling surveillance. People who are off work, people who are retired, people who are nosy Nellies, who are just following you because they know that you're not from their country. And they're looking for a quick payday. If they find somebody on the phone talking about a trade deal, they can report that to the police, and the police can decide whether or not to tap their phone. But that's just a bumbling, untrained surveillance person. When you come across a trained surveillance team, they know how to be discreet. They know how to hide in the shadows. They know the right distance to stay behind you. They have resources that your normal bumbling surveillant doesn't have. But also, your bumbling surveillant gets told not to follow you that day. The first tip that turned me on to the fact that something may be wrong was the lack of a surveillant, was the lack of a bumbling fool. I'd always had one. I had always expected one. And when that person wasn't there, my first instinct was actually to pat myself on the back and tell myself how good I was at spying. But immediately after that, I realized I probably am not that good. What has probably happened is that I need to turn up my own awareness and look to see if I've been surveilled by a sophisticated team. And I went from that moment into what we call a surveillance detection route, or a professional series of movements that's designed to disclose a surveillance team. After identifying that I was under a more sophisticated surveillance team, I knew that I had to get out of the country. Once you're a person of interest, it's just a matter of time before the country can leverage more resources to capture you, to arrest you, to detain you. So my number one goal was to self-evacuate, to get myself out of the country. And I looked at different ways of doing that, and I decided that the most cover-consistent way to leave the country was through a commercial airport. It was going to raise the least red flags. It would give me the most public environment to try to resist their temptation to arrest me or wrap me up, because an airport is a very public place, and it would potentially create an incident to have a foreigner arrested in an airport with or without charges that they would share immediately. When I went to pass through security at the airport, however, my passport had been flagged. So I was immediately moved into secondary screening, and I was pushed into an interrogation room with two different interrogators. I got very fortunate because the interrogators themselves were not as well trained as I was. So I could see their techniques, I could see their struggles, I could see the lack of coordination in their interrogation, which empowered me to resist. It empowered me to counter. And that doesn't mean I argued back with them. It means I knew that I had a position of information superiority over them in this particular interrogation. In the end, after a few hours of interrogation, they ended up letting me go because they didn't have enough to hold me any longer. So as I'm leaving the interrogation on the concourse going to the plane, even as I'm boarding the plane, even as the plane is taking off and flying through foreign airspace, at no point did I ever feel like I had escaped. One of the things that spy movies and films get completely wrong is what it feels like to actually escape. I was watching a spy TV show recently, and these two people barely escaped an explosion in a house. And they went back to their safe house, and they sat down, and they had like a drink. Like they shared a bottle of scotch. That is 100%, that is not what it feels like when you survive or when you escape a dangerous situation. The first thing is that you never think you've escaped, ever. You escape one trying moment, and all that's going through your head is, what's the next moment where I might be captured, I might be killed, I might be caught. I didn't have my scotch moment until after I got back into my own identity, into my own home, when I got back from the operation, which was 36 hours later.
How did it feel to see your wife again?
The romantic answer would be to felt like it was wonderful to see my wife again, that she was all that I had thought about. But the reality was that it wasn't until I saw her that I even really remembered I was married. The whole time that I was trying to get back, all I was worried about was, what if something interrupts me? What if I get caught? What if I get captured? And then the constant kind of impending doom of knowing that I was going to have to report to CIA, that I was under surveillance, that I was going to have to justify and defend myself, that I was going to have to explain what was going on, what were the ramifications for the operation, what were the ramifications for the other officers, was it even safe for us to send these officers in anymore? Is the mole on top of me? Is the mole so knowledgeable about me that my personal safety is at risk in other parts of the world? That's all I was thinking about. It wasn't until I actually walked back into our safe space behind a padlocked door and dropped my Alex Hernandez identity and literally picked up my Andrew Bustamante identity, and my wife walked into the room, and that's when I saw her and I was like, oh, I'm married again. It's great to see you. Here's a kiss on your forehead. Here's a hug. Holy shit. How do I report this?
Did you catch them all?
The mole was captured about 5 years after my wife and I left CIA. In reading the case file, we identified that it was much of our operational activity that created the first bits of information that allowed FBI to build a case against the mole. Evidence has to be collected for years in order to make a rock-solid case. So while the mole may have been identified while we were still operating, they weren't confident that they could actually hold that person accountable criminally until 2019 when he was arrested in a U.S. airport. The success of the cell is really astounding. Our cell model became the new modus operandi, the new primary methodology that CIA applied in 2016. The idea of stovepiped skill sets was replaced with this idea of collaborative teams, the idea of using administrators in foreign deployed positions to support operators became the norm. And since then, the CIA has adapted and evolved and deployed more of these cells around the field in order to face the current threats and anticipated threats facing the United States.
How does it feel to know that your operations lead to securing American lives?
There's, of course, an element of pride in knowing that your operational impact mattered. But that's the job. The minimum requirement is to do what you're supposed to do. The minimum requirement is to keep Americans safe. The minimum requirement is to save American lives. So while we saw the entire agency change, and while we knew it was based on our idea, and while we knew we proved the concept, what we're proud of is the fact that we helped our peers to succeed and to go on to make bigger and better careers for themselves and have more and more impact. That, in a strange way, is actually more of a unique reward than just keeping Americans safe. We ended up leaving our job with CIA, but not having support to find a new job. If you could imagine trying to find a job with a resume where your last 7 years, nobody can speak to what you did, nobody picks up the phone when you call them. We looked like fucking drug dealers. We looked completely fraudulent. I was trying to fit into a norm again, when CIA had given me a skill set to break away from the norm. And as soon as that clicked, everything changed. I could fake my way through a interview. My wife was a trained person who was designed to find people of interest. So we worked together. She found an executive with a position that she knew he was trying to fill. She knew where he played golf. She knew what his favorite drink was. She knew how many kids he had. She knew when he was going to be there. And then it just turned into an operation. And when that operation worked, we did the same thing for her. And then we just started using spy skills in everyday life, and it worked. Cheating worked. Working outside of the norm worked. And that's what gave us the idea to create a company where we teach those skills. And that is my company, Everyday Spy.
On a morality level, you're building relationships based off truth, but also fabrication. How does that feel to do that on a daily basis?
The artificial nature of these exchanges is awkward for some people, but that goes all the way back to how and why CIA recruits officers the way they recruit people. We have a term for it. We call it moral flexibility, where you have morals, you have things that you believe in, you have priorities, but you're willing to be flexible about when you use them. So we all have it, but people have different thresholds of it. Some people have moral flexibility that prevents them from even telling a lie. I'm not one of those people. I grew up in a household where you couldn't complain, you couldn't talk about your feelings. There was no audience for that. So lying became fundamental to success. It became fundamental to fitting in. And that foundation as a child is what made it so that as an adult, I understood that there are times where lying is not only warranted, but required. So if I'm always lying to keep Americans safe, I can lie about anything.
The world is a very different place to when you joined the CIA. What are the threats you see for global security, and would you join the CIA today if you could again?
Oof. Well, good questions. The number one thing that I've identified since leaving CIA is the rapid rate of change. You see the rise of authoritarian regimes, you see the decline of voter activity, you see just incredible trends moving so fast. Our enemies are changing faster. And as a response to that, we're starting to question our own democracy. And we're starting to give ourselves an out to let democracies change fast, which is really just making us more like our enemies. Organizations like CIA have a very strict hierarchy of leadership, and that leadership is directly to the executive, the president. CIA's role is very much up in the air, especially in the United States, because CIA has been at odds with its own president in the past. After Donald Trump's first administration, CIA saw a mass exodus and resignations, and it still hasn't bounced back from that. You start to see the decline of US power, the decline of US influence, the decline of the US dollar worldwide, which makes it harder for CIA officers to do their job. So now not only are they in a more hostile environment because the environment's hostile to the United States, but they're even in a hostile administrative environment because the chief executive doubts them. It's got to be a difficult place now to build a career. It's got to be a difficult place to run operations. That said, if they called me today and asked me to come back, I would say yes, because it's not about the career. Even the highest ranking CIA officer there right now knows that their career is a benefit, that they do it for the mission. They do it for the cause. They do it because they believe in America.
After all your experience, traveling around the world, being in some of the most dangerous scenarios possible, what's the most important thing you've learned about people?
People are predictable, irregardless of their race, their age, their educational background, their gender, their language. They're all predictable, and they're predictable in the same way because we have one very important piece of biology in common, our brain. That pink matter processes the same in all people. And because they're so predictable, you can set things in motion that benefit you. People will try to make the case that it's wrong to manipulate others. What I learned at CIA is that manipulation and motivation are two parts of the same coin. Getting people to do something that benefits you, if you're getting them to do it because it also benefits them, that's motivation. If you're getting them to do what you want them to do and it doesn't benefit them, that's manipulation.
Have you manipulated me today?
I understood that your role here was the producer. So I understood that there was something that you were trying to make and that you want that thing to be made according to your vision. So the more that I'm in line with your vision, the more you're likely going to dedicate yourself to making sure that this interview comes out best. I didn't want you at any point to think that I was going to challenge your vision. I wanted to make sure that your camera people didn't have to move. I wanted to make sure that your audio person didn't even have to tell me when to stop talking. I wanted to come in and be so easy that the natural next step for Chadbible is to invite me back again.